Recording a big guitar sound and having it sit properly in your mix can sometimes be a challenge. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks that will help you achieve better guitar sounds in your mix. API EQs and compressors are great for getting a big sound, yet still keep the sound focused and tight. So for this video, I will be using the Waves API collection. I use the API collection on just about every instrument in the mix. However, I will only be focusing on the guitars in this video. Let's start with the rhythm guitar. Here I have a pretty basic riff. I double tracked it and then I panned it hard left and hard right. Usually if I'm going to double track guitar, I want them to sound a bit different from each other. Maybe a Telecaster on one side, maybe a Les Paul on the other, or using different amps. If I don't have that luxury and the guitars sound pretty similar, I like to change up the EQ sound on each side. So maybe on the left side it has a bit more of a mid-range punch. And on the right side I have a bit more high-end, boosting somewhere around 5K or so. And I also may bump up the low and low-mid frequencies. The frequencies adjusted, of course, will depend on the other instruments in the mix. And keep in mind, if you only focus on making the guitar sound good when it's soloed, it may not work in the whole mix. I like to make my EQ adjustments with all the instruments playing to get a feel for how everything works together. I also like to send the guitars to an available bus with the API 2500 compressor on it. This really smooths out the guitars and helps them sit in the mix better. I started with a fairly moderate amount of compression, which is what I'd normally do if there was just guitar, bass, and drums. Since this guitar part has to sit in a mix with a distorted bass, organ, drums, and a lead guitar, we're fighting for some of the same frequency space, I compressed it a bit more than I normally would. Here's the final settings that worked well for this track. Since this guitar had a very direct sound with not a lot of room sound, I also set up another bus for a short guitar room sound, and the guitar room setting in Waves H Reverb is perfect for this. The lead guitar is much more present and in your face, and this single take was recorded with 4 microphones going into an Apogee Quartet, 2 microphones on the amp directly on the speakers, and then 2 room mics. For the lead guitar sound, I really wanted to round off the top end a bit more, so I rolled back a little bit of the top end and experimented with boosting the low and low mid section on the amp mics. The room mics I didn't do much EQ at all. Sometimes you may want to cut in the low and low mids if it gets a little too muddy, especially on rhythm guitar parts. On lead parts, I kind of like it a little bit rounder and a little bit thicker sounding. I also set up a compression bus using the API 2500 on the lead guitar as well. Here are the settings I did for that. And as I adjust, you can hear the difference in the sound. less compression, it still sounds a little bit more edgy. The harder I push the compression, it sounds a little rounder. Push too much, it can get a little buried. So there's that happy medium point that you need to find. And then finally on the master bus, I use the API 2500 again, as it's amazing for gluing together the whole mix, along with the API 560 EQ for some slight sweetening, and the Waves L2 limiter to keep the levels in check.